Hello and welcome to our latest You Are My Boro. If you're watching on YouTube, welcome along. If you're following us if you subscribe to the podcast, then hello. Just a reminder that we are now on Apple Podcasts. So if that's where you get your podcast, if that's the platform you use, then make sure you download and subscribe and leave us a rating and review as well. We did our last episode at the back end of last week, but given what was a crazy, manic, busy week by transfer standards, a fair bit has happened since then. We've got pre-season to look ahead to as well. Scott, you are at the Suit Direct Stadium on Friday night as Boro kick off the summer with a game at Hartlepool United.
I am. I'm off to pools. To be honest, it might have been a mad, crazy, hectic end of the last week for you because you were covering all the Boro signings. I was just sat watching the cricket, so it was fine for me.
Yeah, I wasn't bitter at all when you
exactly.
What was it? Cricket on the Friday, pulp on Sunday, while there's smoke coming off my keyboard at home.
And every 5 minutes I was sat there, I was getting alerts on my phone. Oh, another Boro signing. Oh, another England wicket. Oh, another Boro signing.
I mean, I tweeted at the back end of last week. I can't remember Boro ever making 6 signings in a week.
No, I can't either. There was a few, wasn't there, where there was like 2 or 3 on a day, and I remember a couple of press conferences back in the day when they would have 2 or 3 kind of new signings lined up together. But no, 6 in a week was pretty crazy, wasn't it? I mean, to be fair, when we did the pod last week, I think at least 3 or 4 of them were pretty well in the pipeline, so they weren't kind of completely out the blue. Although there was still a couple that kind of came from left field in amongst that, but no, it was a busy old week. And then, like you say, back into it properly this week there with a trip to pools, which I would imagine I'll still need gloves, hat, and thermal long johns for come 9 o'clock and the final whistle on Friday night.
Yeah, you're not wrong there. Yeah, on that, when you're saying about kind of previous signings, when there's been a flurry of signings and they've been unveiled together, I was tagged in a picture of Karanka. And it was the end of the January window in the promotion season, I think. And he had his signings sitting proudly alongside him. And there was Jordan Rhodes there and Gaston Ramirez, and a certain Kike Sola was taking pride of place as well on the table. Yeah. He's definitely one of those did he really happen signings, isn't he?
Did he really play for Boro? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Absolutely.
Before we go, let's talk transfers then. And then we'll have a chat about the friendlies at the back end of the episode. 6 in, 2 goalkeepers in Tom Glover and Seny Dieng. Obviously, Sammy Silvera arriving as well with Morgan Rogers, Alex Gilbert coming from Brentford, and then Rav van den Berg, the 18-year-old defender, the very highly rated Dutch defender. And I was actually speaking to a Dutch journalist last night about Rav van den Berg, who's given me some great stuff. So keep your eyes peeled for that in the coming days online and in the paper. All young signings. Boro clearly have high hopes for all of them. Exciting signings, great to get so many done early on. But it was clear from what we're told, Scott, and from what Michael Carrick said in his interview with the club at the weekend, that the priority now, as Boro look to the next few weeks, is signing maybe more senior, established, experienced players.
Yeah. So I think there's a few different elements to this, isn't it? I think, as we alluded to on the last vid, I think this is the first real tangible proof of the new Boro model, if you like, or certainly the shift in what Boro are doing from what we saw under both Warnock and Wilder. Seny Dieng's probably a bit different in that, he is vastly more experienced than the other 5. He's a championship goalkeeper. He's a kind of performer in an area that Boro understandably have felt that they needed experience in. But the other 5 very much fit the model of young, pretty cheap, pretty unproven, often from overseas, often from markets that aren't necessarily regularly exploited by English championship clubs. Players that Michael Carrick clearly feels he can develop and improve, and that Kieran Scott clearly feels will either improve and play a big part in Boro moving forward, or will improve and then be sold on at a profit that can be reinvested. You know, it's an increasingly common model right across the English game, certainly within the Championship. It's obviously the strong parallels to what's been happening up the road at Sunderland in the last 18 months or so. It makes absolute sense for a club like Boro to be trying to do this when they've not got parachute payments. They have to fit in with FFP. Clearly, you know, every penny counts really at the minute for Boro. So it's a model that makes a lot of sense, but it also needs to be counterbalanced with a core of players who have been there and done it before and who can kind of help these young lads come along. Now, Boro are in a pretty good position from the word go, I think, because to a large extent, they've got that core, haven't they? I think, again, on the last vid, we spoke about when you talk about the likes of Frye, McNair, Coulson, Smith, Tuber, Matt Crooks, who's obviously re-signed. You know, there's a real spine and a core there that everybody knows can do it at Championship level. Michael Carrick can rely on, should help bring these young lads on. But I think Carrick was pretty strong, wasn't he? As you said, that he did with the club, saying, I think between now and the end of the window, that's probably the young development side of it pretty much put to bed. I think if we do see another, 3 or 4 signings, I think we're probably likely to see this summer. I suspect they'll pretty much be more experienced, probably more expensive. You know, certainly when we talk to strikers, we'll get onto positions in a minute. I think that will have to be more expensive, but certainly more experienced, less of a gamble, if you like, than the players Boro have signed so far. And I think it is a gamble, but it's a calculated gamble because unlike in previous years, we're not talking millions and millions and £1 million of outlays. You know, I think, as I say, if you take Dieng out of it, I think the other 5, probably talking a total combined spend of somewhere around £2 million. Now, you know, you don't have to look too far into the record books to see when Boro was squandering £2 million just on one of these type of players. So to have got 5 of them in, you know, and some of them, as you rightly say, really highly sought after by a lot of clubs right across Europe, I think it's a big tick in the box for Boro's recruitment team so far.
Yeah, and I think just a couple of things to add to that. From conversations I had last week, one of the points that was made pretty clear was the intention this summer wasn't necessarily to get the younger players over the line first and then move on to the more senior established players. It's just that, unsurprisingly, the deals to sign those younger type players aren't as complicated and as complex and don't drag on as long as what they do with the more experienced players. And I think Seny Dieng is a good example of that because last week that was a deal that twisted this way and that, and at one stage that looked unlikely, and then 24 hours, 48 hours later it's done and he's flying out to Portugal. So it certainly wasn't the intention of Boro to you know, right, let's set out and sign these younger players and then move on to the more experienced players. It's just the way it's fallen. And like you were saying there, I think there's kind of real delight inside the club as to some of the deals that Boro have managed to complete, especially the Vandenberg deal, given the interest from elsewhere. And the other thing, again from conversations last week, when I'd asked, are these coming in? You know, we all know what happened last year, Chris Wilder, development signings and this and that. You know, I asked, are these players coming in as part of the first team? And the answer was they'll certainly be given the chance to be part of the first team. There's no pressure on them, is there? If they're good enough, then they'll form a part of Michael Carrick's plans for the coming season. But they've all signed long-term deals. It's 3 and 4 year deals across the board. Even for Dieng, who's 28, a 4-year deal. So if Boro don't see the best of Vandenberg for 18 months, if they don't see the best of Alex Gilbert until the season after this one, then nothing gained, nothing lost. It's still, you know, it's still success. But that then means that there is a need to add a bit more experience, because what you don't want is the squad to be short of players and then having to call on youngsters who perhaps aren't quite ready. But we know from last season that Michael Carrick won't do that, will he? He'll play players when he believes they're ready to play.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just on the back of that, the other kind of big thing with this is they're permanent signings, aren't they? And you know, I think there was a feeling last season that a lot of loan players kind of left at once, and it meant you did have to do this big kind of restocking job. Now, I suspect moving forward, because they've got this base level of young players now, assuming these players develop at the rate Boro hope and expect them to develop at, then, I don't think we'll be seeing 6 and 7 coming in every summer at that kind of level. Maybe at the level below, and that's another level where Boro can then start to look to restock and bring it in even earlier. But, I think there was a feeling that the club needed this injection of youth, but on a permanent basis so that they can develop it themselves. Now, when you talk about getting these deals in early, I think part of that reason, and part of the reason, like you say, that certainly maybe the striker situation is having to be left to here in the window, because I suspect that is an area where Boro will be seriously considering Premier League loans. And Premier League loans invariably don't happen until the last couple of weeks of the window, once the Premier League clubs have taken players on their tour, decided who's going to be in the squad and not submitted their squad lists. Right, last week of the window, let's get 3 or 4 out. And so I think that Boro will certainly have an eye on that come the end of the window.
And I think going into the pre-season games, there's always an air of intrigue and excitement ahead of pre-season, but probably even more so this year, because the fact that 5 of the 6 signings so far are largely unknown quantities, so that there is that intrigue to see what they're like, what are they capable of, how ready are they really?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be really interesting to see who plays at Hartlepool, who plays at York, then obviously moving forward into the rest of the matches. And exactly, someone like Alex Gilbert, who's been banging in goals for Brentford's B team. Well, we're 2 people who, through our job, watch a fair bit of football. I'm sure there's a lot of Boro fans who watch an awful lot of football too. And yet, I'll hold my hand up. Other than the little clips that I've been watching in the last few weeks, I haven't seen Alex Gilbert play 90 minutes. I don't really know what scoring a load of goals for Brentford B means in comparison to being able to do it at the Championship. So that's going to be really interesting to see. Rodgers, clearly another one that's going to be really, really interesting to see what level he's at in his development. And then, Silvera, let's be honest, everyone loves a winger, don't they? Everyone loves a kind of attack and flair player. So, yeah, let's see where he's at. It'd be interesting these next few weeks to just get a little bit of an early gauge at whether it looks like they're going to be capable of stepping in, certainly in the first half of next season.
And when we look ahead then to what comes next, we touched on this last week, that when you look at the priority positions, centre forward, as you discussed there, is clearly a priority. Certainly one, very likely two, from what we gather, depending on, I guess, what the decision is with Josh Coburn, for example. Left back, we know, is clearly a priority. Obviously, Mark Bowler's left since we last recorded. He's headed for Turkey, which doesn't really change anything, because we knew left back was a priority area anyway. Obviously, Ryan Giles was there last year. We know Ryan Giles remains a target. He'd be keen on a move back to Boro if the opportunity presented itself, and that's still very much something that Boro are working on. And then midfield, which we talked about at length earlier in the summer, didn't we? Is that maybe a bit of kind of expert cover and support for Johnny Howson, do you think?
I think, yeah. So left back clearly is an absolute no-brainer, because at the minute there's a gaping hole there for a first choice left back to fill. Yes, we'll get a look at Hayden Coulson in pre-season, and Michael Carrick will be watching him pretty closely to see whether he thinks he's ready for whatever next season. But even taking into that count, Boro need an established first choice left back. So that's a key priority position. Now that'll be interesting, because it needs to be someone who's ready to step in straight away. So that immediately makes you think, well, that probably means either Championship player, Premier League loan, or purchase from abroad, but at a reasonably, high established level abroad. So that's going to be an interesting one, because whichever of those boxes you tick won't really come cheap. And then clearly at the other end of the pitch, the need for a proven number 9 ready to hit the ground running is pretty obvious as well. And that's the one where Boro are going to be having to commit the vast majority of their summer resources to, whether it be a permanent signing, which clearly isn't going to be cheap if they're any good, or a Premier League loan, but almost certainly a Premier League loan with high wages. Again, if it's anyone half decent, as we saw with Cameron Archer, half the clubs in the Championship be wanting him. So there are a couple of battles Boro are going to have to fight. Yeah, beyond that, another centre forward would probably be handy. Not necessarily essential, although I guess, as you said, a lot in that argument will depend on what happens with Coburn and, to a slightly lesser degree, what happens with Matthew Hoppe, who, you know, are they going to be that third striker, if you like? If we kind of count Force as a potential option, Crooks as a potential option in and around that. If they're not, if neither of them are deemed to be ready, then I think you need another forward. And then I think with Moat going, you probably need someone just to fill that gap, don't you? As cover for Johnny Howson, able to step in if the workload starts to get a bit much for Howson. And let's be honest, you know, he keeps on rolling back the years, but surely at some point there'll come a stage where, at the very least, he can't keep going Saturday, Tuesday. So I think there needs to be another player in there, although, you know, Moat was almost the perfect signing last year, wasn't he? Because he was pretty cheap in that he was a Championship player that a Championship club didn't want, and yet it was really a face that didn't fit. So he was more than capable of doing it at Championship level. If Boro could find that type of signing, I think that would tick the box for them for midfield. I don't expect them to be going out and spending really big money on another central midfielder, because I think the money that they've got left now will have to go up front and left back. So I think the centre mid will be some kind of plug a gap cover option, may well be another loan.
Yeah, and it's interesting on the subject of loans. So Ryan Giles, for example, who we know is the leading left back target. The question there would be, would that be another loan, or more likely a Wolves now going to cash in? If Giles isn't going to play for Wolves this season, then how many loans do you send him on? Has it been 8? He's 23 now. He's got 2 years left, so it feels like now is the time for Wolves to cash in if they're going to.
Yeah, it does.
And yeah, to repeat what I said, we know how much he liked it up here, and how ideal he was, really, how perfect he was for Michael Carrick's system. Up front, Cameron Archer. Now the kind of, you know, talk on and off the record really since the end of last season is there's an acceptance that it looks extremely difficult to get Archer back, and yet, you know, Villa are having a bold summer, really, aren't they, with the signings they're bringing in. There's talk that Unai Emery is going to look to bring in at least one more centre forward, and yet he only plays one up front. He's got Ollie Watkins there. It's a fine balance, but obviously they've got Europe to consider this season. It's a fine balance that they're going to strike, isn't it? Does he go out on loan again if he's not going to play, or do you keep him around to maybe play a part in Europe? If he does go, is the logical next step after the Preston and Boro loans a Premier League move, or do you look at Boro and think, well, they're likely to be competing again. He's going to be the main man. He's probably going to play every week for a full season. It still feels like a long shot, but it's an interesting.
My worry would be that if Villa send Archer back out on loan, which I do think is a possibility, definitely, because for all the things you've alluded to, you know, it's very easy to say, well, we want to have a look at him, we want to give him a chance, but Watkins is clearly going to be their number one. If they bring in another forward as well, which, you know, all the talk is that they're going to, then is Cameron Archer going to be third choice in a system where you only ever play one? I don't really see that aiding him or Villa massively. The worry would be that I think if he gets sent out, I'd be very surprised if there weren't Premier League clubs who were in for him. You know, you look at the clubs that came up, Burnley, Sheffield United, Luton. I would think all of them would take Cameron Archer at the drop of a hat if they could get him on loan. Everton surely need strikers. You know, barely had a striker worth their salt last season. Haven't signed one yet. Yeah, Bournemouth, you could imagine. You know, there's 4 or 5 Premier League clubs that I think would be very keen on signing Cameron Archer. And yeah, Archer, you know, relished his time at Boro. Yes, he's probably more guaranteed to play at Boro, but if you're Cameron Archer, having come off the back of a successful Euros campaign with the under-21s, I think you back yourself to go somewhere and start scoring goals in the Premier League, don't you? And that would be my worry for Boro with Archer, that I just think, I think he'll be a Premier League player this season, whether it's for Villa or not.
And it's interesting, isn't it? In that, again, I think there's been an acceptance that if Villa were looking to cash in this summer, which kind of feels unlikely, really, given that he hasn't been given a proper crack there yet. But if there were, if you consider that Ellis Sims has just gone for between £6 and £8 million to Coventry on the back of a half-decent half season at Sunderland, then what on earth do you value Cameron Archer at, who's done it over 2 seasons, who's an England under-21 international? You're probably doubling that and some.
Yeah, if Villa sell Archer, then the only Championship clubs I think that could afford him would be parish clubs. Yeah. A Leicester or a Leeds or someone like that, because they're selling players at big money and they've got the parachute payments as well. So, yeah, I mean, again, that's not impossible, but I'm like you. I don't see the sense in Villa selling him at the minute because he's not had a chance there and he's still at yes, he's had that experience, but he's at a very formative stage of his development and he's just carved a niche out for himself as one of the best under-21 strikers in Europe. So I don't think Villa sell, but I could imagine him being loaned to a Premier League club this summer.
Couple of exits. We touched on Mark Bowler heading to Turkey to Samsunspor, which he had a year left on his deal. He was cover at best last season, wasn't he? I always felt kind of Bowler's problem under Carrick, really. He was a left back, isn't he? Absolutely serviceable and reliable left back rather than a wing back. And I think back to Bowler's first season, he looked so out of his depth in the early stages of that first season when Jonathan Woodgate was in charge. And if someone had said that, he'd go on to play more than 100 games for Boro at that stage, I wouldn't have had it. But he was one of Warnock's real success stories, wasn't he? Warnock put an arm around him, got the best out of him. And at one stage, Warnock was doing the classic Warnock thing where he was saying he wouldn't swap any defence in the Premier League for his defence at Boro. And Mark Bowler and Anthony Dyke-Steele were part of that. But his exit makes sense for everyone concerned, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I mean, you're right. He had a real up and down kind of Boro career, didn't he? Because obviously he came in and then he went back on loan, didn't he? Because it just wasn't working out. Back to Blackpool, and then like you say, he became one of Warnock's absolute favourites. Bowler and Dyke-Steele were the two kind of pet projects that and Watmore, I suppose, that Warnock made a real success of, and certainly like to let us know that he'd made a success of it in his own inimitable style. But he did play ever so well under Warnock, but then Face didn't really fit under Wilder. And then, like you say, he doesn't really tick the box of what Carrick wants, does he? Especially if you're sticking with Smith on the opposite flank, then you really need a Giles-style attacking threat down one flank. And Bowler doesn't really give you that. So, it does make absolute sense. It makes me probably think that he thinks Coulson could be part of the squad and be the backup left back next season. I think that if Carrick had taken an early look at Coulson and thought this guy's absolutely miles off, there's no chance, then I think he would have been more reticent to let Bowler go, especially when at the minute you don't have a first choice. So it's, there's still plenty of time, but it's not inconceivable that Boro go into the first game of the new season still needing to sign a left back. So if you didn't think Coulson was at all ready, then I'm not sure you would have pressed the kind of green light to let Bowler go. But that's obviously happened now. So that does make me think Coulson will probably be at least part of the squad next season.
And Sol Bryn, season-long loan to Leyton Orient, again makes it's the logical next step, isn't it? Bryn was had an excellent season at Swindon in what was a difficult season for Swindon, really, kind of mid-table. And yet Bryn's stats were up there with the best in League Two. He came back to Bury, signed a new contract, but with Tom Glover and Seny Dieng both coming in, with Liam Roberts there as well. At 22-year-old, a season of being third choice keeper at best would have been a waste of time, really, for Bryn.
Yeah.
To move to a League One club after success in Scotland and then with Swindon, again, is the wise next step for everyone involved, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. It's an interesting one with Bryn because we keep hearing that he's highly thought of and that he will be a good goalkeeper down the line. It's sometimes very, very hard for these young lads to get that chance, though, isn't it? I think of Ainsley Pears, who we heard very, very similar things to when he was a Boro player, and yet eventually he had to move to get the chance. Freddie Woodman up at Newcastle was a similar situation as well, where for 2 or 3 seasons, he was always being highly talked of, but went out on loan. And then you thought, well, next season has to be the one. And eventually it became clear he just wasn't going to get in there. Is that going to happen with Solbrin further down the line? It might. It very well might, I think. Although, let's wait and see. He did really, really well last season. There's no reason to think that he can't handle the step up to take League One in his stride. But it's at what stage will a Boro manager be able to say, okay, he's the one I'm now going to hang my hat on for the season, come what may. Will a manager get to that position? Let's wait and see. I mean, Roberts is now an interesting one because obviously he came in from Northampton last year, would have been not overjoyed, but I imagine reasonably content to sit as number 2 last year, get good training, be ready if anything happened with Stefan, and do that. Now, obviously, at the moment, you would assume with Dieng and Glover coming in, all of a sudden he's number 3 and he's kind of miles away. So it wouldn't surprise me if he left on loan as well before the end of this window. I don't think Boro would want to sell him because I think you want a third choice who you can recall. If one of your first 2 gets a long-term injury, then you need that number 3 to be able to come back. But, if he's not even going to be getting on the bench for the next 6 months, first half of the season, if Glover and Dieng are both fit, and you would imagine that's going to be the scenario, then that's no good to him or Boro either. So it wouldn't surprise me if they look to get him out later in the window.
Matt Crooks has signed a new 1-year deal. This goes back to something last year in that once Carrick came in, he was quite keen early doors, wasn't he, to resolve any contract uncertainty, really. The likes of Johnny Howson signed a new deal. We know obviously Duncan Watmore moved on. Now Matt Crooks was entering the final 12 months of his deal. Although he wasn't a regular starter last year, when I looked this morning, there was only 7 games after Carrick's arrival that he didn't play some part in. So he was clearly a key member off the pitch, and we know how important he is off the pitch. All that contract does is avoid any uncertainty as the season rumbles on, doesn't it? It gives him that bit more comfort. Now, what you wonder is what follows, because I think I'm right in saying Dale Frye's entering the final 12 months. Paddy McNair, again, I'd have to check that one. And then we know, obviously, the Chuba Akpom situation. Now, Akpom obviously didn't travel to Portugal last week. That was because of a niggling knee injury that it was troubling him at the back end of last season. Boro put a video out on Tuesday of training, and I didn't see him in that. That's clearly something that Michael Carrick's going to be asked about when he speaks to the press this weekend after the friendlies.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so Crooks first, I think it makes absolute sense for all parties, doesn't it? Like you say, from a Boro perspective, it just avoids heading into January with 6 months left. What's happening with Matt Crooks? You leave yourself open to clubs putting a bid on the table, and suddenly it's potentially a hard thing to turn down if you fear him going for nothing. From Crooks's point of view, I think he's at a time of his career where he's genuinely settled up here, really enjoying his football. Yes, he's not necessarily starting every week, but as you say, he's still a pretty important part of what Michael Carrick's doing. He will get chances this season, whether they be as a number 9 or back in a more familiar midfield role. So I think that one makes absolute sense. I think it's probably harder to roll a kind of 1-year extension like this onto either Frye, McNair or Akpom's contracts, just because they're at a kind of different stage of things, aren't they? I mean,
especially Frye and Chuba.
Yeah, exactly. Chuba at some stage is either going to sign the big contract with Boro that takes him to pretty much the end of his career, or get the last big move of his career. Frye, Frye's getting to the stage where if he doesn't move on in the next 12, 18 months, then he'll be wanting a big long-term contract at Boro that says, I'm going to be one of your main men for the next 3, 4, 5 years, and I'm throwing it all in with kind of Boro as my hometown club. I don't think what either of them would want to do is tag another year on at the same terms that they're on now to kind of shuffle that further down the line when, for both players, things are probably going to come to head this season, aren't they? It's a big season for both Dale Frye and Chuba Akpom, I think, in terms of they're either going to be banging on the door saying, right, I deserve a really big, lucrative new contract here at Boro because I've shown I'm one of your main men, or Boro are going to have to bite the bullet and cash in.
Yeah, which I mean, you look at Frye. We only had Sol Bamba on a couple of weeks ago, didn't he? And Bamba was talking about how he believes Frye's a Premier League defender. He should be playing in the Premier League. We know how proud of a Teesside of Frye is. His dream would be to get to the Premier League with Boro, wouldn't it? And I think the frustrating thing for Frye last season was the early signs were he was going to be playing his best football for Boro under Carrick, and then he obviously got the sending off against Sunderland, but then the injury that ruled him out for the end of the season. It's good to see him in training in the summer, and I agree with Bamba in that he's got a big season ahead, because I think when you look at the defence, as impressive as McNair was in the second half of last season. And I think this goes back. I couldn't believe it when Wilder was playing a back three and Frye wasn't in it. I think it's hard to make a case for a Boro defence at its strongest without Dale Frye in it. You know, Frye at his best is for me among the best Championship defenders. And I remember when Jonathan Woodgate was in charge and there was Premier League interest. Was it Burnley at the time?
Yeah.
And Adam Webster had just gone. Had he gone from Bristol City to Brighton? Was that 25 million or something like that? And Woodgate made the point at that stage, if Webster's worth 25 million, then so's Dale Frye. Now since then, it's been a frustrating couple of seasons, really. But I don't think there's any disputing just how good Frye is when he's at his best. I agree with Bamba in that when Bamba said, you know, Boro have got a Premier League defender. It's just getting that run with him, isn't it? Which we'll hopefully see this year.
And you know, all the way through, really, that's just been down to injuries. So, you know, Dale Frye just needs, as you say, a 6-month spell, completely injury-free, where he can play week after week after week and show just how good he is. You know, we all know it. We've all seen it. But it has been stop-start. And the worry would be that, you know, if through no fault of his own, but if he was to suffer another stop-start season, then all of a sudden you'd have to start, you know, thinking, well, you know, is he going to actually live up to be the player that we all kind of hope and think that he will be? Because the talent's definitely there. But it's just, like you say, for the last couple of seasons, he hasn't been able to show it over the course of a full season, and that's what he needs.
I can't remember that it was in an interview with Frye after a game or with a manager. This is going back a few years, but he was talking about how in the early years of his career, he never really had a full summer. He never really had a full pre-season because he was away with England at the various age groups. And when you think of those young players, you only have to look at someone like Cameron Archer now. I know that's slightly different in that Archer didn't play an awful lot of football in the first half of the season, but to go to play a full season, then to go away, to come back, have a couple of weeks, and then lump straight back into pre-season. I look at someone like Wayne Rooney, and you know, it was no surprise to me that Rooney was finished a few years earlier than what his peers, because since he was 16, he just played non-stop. There was no full breaks of recovery. And I remember Frye, or a manager, again, I can't remember who it was, saying that just having the chance to have a full summer made a world of difference. Now, I know that's going back a few years. Dale's 25 now. But I think this full summer will have done him the world, especially after, because we know he was getting back, wasn't he, right at the end of the season. So yeah, hopefully we'll see him at his best, and he'll feature in the pre-season game. So you're at Pools on Friday, then it's York on Saturday, then Boro head for Rotherham. What are you
New York?
What are you most looking forward to see? What are you most intrigued by in the summer?
I think the Pools game will be interesting. It's always a good atmosphere at Pools. Friday night, it's the first one. Like you say, it's a first look at some of the new lads. There'll be a load of Boro fans there. I think that'll be good crack. And then I think the other one, just for the novelty value, is Betis at Chesterfield. It's always nice to go to grounds in pre-season that you haven't been to. I went to the old Saltergate, but I've not been to Chesterfield's new ground. So that'll be quite nice to kind of tick that off the list, not too far down the road. Betis, obviously, a little bit of interest and glamour there. So I think they're the two that probably would stand out. And then obviously Auxerre at home, you would imagine, will be the one that we start to see what Carrick's first choice team is actually going to look like. And obviously just being a week before the start of the season. So, you know, if you're picking three, it's probably those three. But it'll just be nice to be back watching them at Pools on Friday night.
I can't remember whether we talked about this last week, but the glamour of pre-season, I remember getting locked in at a Mansfield town that were managed by Steve Evans at the time.
Right.
And it was one of them where the lights gone out as you sat in the press, up on the press desk, still tapping away. And then when we close the laptop, go out, all the gates are shut, and you have this kind of moment of panic where you think, am I spending the night here at the home of what's Mansfield's ground called? I can't remember.
Field Mill?
Field Mill, that's it.
Field Mill, yeah. Yeah, well, so I did my first pre-season game on Saturday at South Shields, Sunderland. You went to Gateshead, Sunderland, didn't you? They played 2 in a day, and it 12:30 kickoff at South Shields. There I am, go up, shorts, t-shirt, which I've basically been living in all summer. Gets to about 20 minutes in. I'm sat, obviously, at the back of the kind of little stand at South Shields, complete shade, no sunlight coming in whatsoever. Starts absolutely tipping down. I'm not kidding you. It was like November at the river. It was absolutely freezing. So don't ever think, oh, here we go. Hot bacon sun, glorious sunny pre-season. It was like, no, this is football's back. Football's back. I'm sat here shivering. The rain is absolutely bouncing down. Let's go.
I was the opposite because the press box at Gateshead is that old school glass box.
Ah, yes. Yeah.
And it was like a sauna.
Like an oven.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I was the opposite. I was shivering. I need a coat. I'll be taking a coat to pools. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, so pools on Friday night, York Saturday, Rotherham next week, and then it's off to Chesterfield to play Betis. Is something that I didn't think I'd be saying at the start of the summer. Scott, you're there Friday night. We'll have the usual live blog reaction afterwards.
Looking forward to it,
and then analysis.
We'll roll on from there, won't we?
Over the course of the weekend. So thanks again for watching, listening, however you join us. As we always say, if there's anything you want us to discuss, then please just let us know on Twitter or leave a comment in the comments section here. Like, subscribe, rate, review, tell your mates, and we'll be back next week with the latest You Are My Boro.